Cedric Washington was 44 years old, made $71,000 a year as a public school principal, and on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:15 p.m., his world was cleaved in two by a single, innocent question. He was in the living room of his modest Westview bungalow, a home filled with the scent of lemon cleaner and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. His daughter Jade, 9 years old with bright, curious eyes and hair full of beaded twists that clicked softly when she moved, was sitting on the floor surrounded by the contents of a dusty shoebox. It was the box of mismatched, unofficial photos, the ones that never made it into the pristine, leather-bound albums at her grandfather's estate. Jade picked up a 5x7 print, its glossy surface smudged with small fingerprints. It was from her cousin's baptism 7 years ago. The photo showed a corner of a church pew, a slice of a stained glass window, and a group of smiling family members. Her Aunt Chloe, her Uncle Marcus, her grandmother, and in the center, her mother, Amara, radiant and beautiful, holding a baby. But the edge of the photo was a harsh, straight line. It cut right through a man's dark suit jacket, bisecting a shoulder and a sleeve. A sliver of a dark brown hand with a simple gold wedding band was visible, resting on Amara's arm. Jade tilted her head. Her voice was clear, unfiltered, and utterly devastating. "Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him, her expression one of pure, logical confusion. "Where did you go?" Cedric looked at the photograph. He didn't need to see the whole picture. He was there in the ghost of that cropped sleeve. He remembered that day perfectly. He was the baby's godfather. He had been standing right next to his wife, his arm around her, a proud smile on his face. In the official family portrait, the one framed in a $500 silver frame on his father-in-law's mantel, he was not there. He had been surgically removed. For 10 years, he had been the subject of 1,000 tiny cuts, a slow and systematic erasure. He had absorbed every single one in silence, for the sake of peace, for the memory of his wife. But hearing the evidence of his own disappearance voiced by his daughter, seeing the confusion in her beloved face, was not a small cut. It was a chasm opening up right there on the $70 area rug from Target. For the first time, the quiet pain had a voice, and it sounded like his little girl. He had spent a decade being told, in the politest, the most surgically precise ways, that he did not belong. Now, he had to wonder, had he been so quiet for so long that he was starting to disappear even to himself? What happens when a man is erased so thoroughly that his own child has to ask where he went? The question hung in the quiet air of the bungalow, more damning than any accusation. 10 years earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Life with Amara was loud and bright and full. Cedric was a 34-year-old history teacher at a public high school, making $42,000 a year and loving every minute of it. Amara was a brilliant corporate lawyer on the fast track, her laughter echoing through their small rental house in Grant Park. They had a 2008 Honda Accord with a dent in the passenger door, $73,000 in student loan debt, and a love that felt like the only real currency in the world. They cooked together, danced in the kitchen to old soul records, and spent Saturdays volunteering at a community garden. Their life was a mosaic of small, joyful, inexpensive moments. Amara's family was another world. Her father, Harlan King, was a real estate magnate who operated out of a glass tower in Buckhead. He lived in a sprawling, 8,000 square foot modern mansion on a manicured acre of land, a property valued at over $2.4 million. It was a house of silent, recessed lighting, white marble floors, and art that was chosen by a consultant for its investment value. Harlan was a tall, imposing black man who wore $8,000 custom suits and a $25,000 Patek Philippe watch. He spoke in a low and measured voice that made pronouncements, not conversation. From the beginning, Harlan's assessment of Cedric was clear, though never spoken aloud. He saw a man who was kind, decent, and utterly lacking in ambition. During their first meeting at a tense dinner at a Buckhead restaurant, where a single steak cost more than Cedric's weekly grocery budget, Harlan had surveyed Cedric's simple $200 suit and his $89 Timex watch with a look of mild, anthropological curiosity. "So, a teacher," Harlan had said, swirling a glass of $150 Cabernet. "That's a noble profession." The word noble was delivered with the same faint pity one might use for a well-behaved but unintelligent dog. Amara, fiercely loyal, had defended him. "Daddy, Cedric is a brilliant educator. He's changing lives." Harlan had smiled, a thin, bloodless motion of his lips. "Of course, darling. Every society needs its functionaries." Cedric had felt the sting but chose to ignore it. He loved Amara, and Harlan was a part of the package. He believed his character, his devotion to Amara, would eventually win the old man over. He had no idea how wrong he was. Harlan didn't want a son-in-law to win him over. He wanted a subsidiary to acquire, another asset to add to his portfolio. Cedric, with his teacher's salary and his belief in public service, was a liability on the family balance sheet. The first official act of erasure happened 6 months after the wedding. It was Christmas. Harlan had hired a well-known Atlanta photographer for a family portrait session at the estate. The fee was $3,000 for a 2-hour session. Cedric stood proudly next to Amara, his hand on the small swell of her pregnant belly. He felt, for a moment, like he was finally being framed as part of the family. The Christmas card arrived a week later. It was printed on thick, expensive cardstock that probably cost $5 per card. On the front was the family portrait. Harlan and his wife Diana seated, their other children and their spouses standing behind them, and Amara, standing alone, glowing and pregnant. Cedric was gone, not just out of focus in the background. He was completely digitally excised. The crop was so clean, you couldn't even tell someone was supposed to be there. When Amara saw it, her face went white with fury. She called her father immediately, her voice trembling. "Daddy, where is Cedric? For why did you cut my husband out of our family Christmas card?" Harlan's voice was smooth, unbothered. "Darling, it was a simple matter of composition. The photographer said the shot was more balanced with an odd number of people standing. It's just a photograph. Don't be so dramatic." "He is my husband. I am carrying his child. And we all love you for it," Harlan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't make this into something it isn't. I'll see you on Christmas Eve." He hung up. Amara was sobbing, a mixture of rage and humiliation. Cedric held her, his own heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, though it wasn't. "It's not worth fighting over. He's a stubborn old man. We know what's real." For the sake of his pregnant wife's peace, he buried his own anger. It was the first of many such burials. He was choosing his marriage over his pride, a calculation that seemed right at the time. He didn't understand then that Harlan wasn't just attacking his pride. He was systematically dismantling his place in the family record. The birth of Jade should have changed things. For a while, it seemed to. Harlan doted on his granddaughter, buying her extravagant gifts: a $400 miniature grand piano, a $2,000 collection of imported dolls, a $500 cashmere baby blanket. But his treatment of Cedric remained a study in quiet contempt. He was Jade's father, never Cedric, a functional title rather than a name. The erasure continued, becoming more brazen with each passing year. It was the accumulation of these incidents that wore him down, like water dripping on a stone. Each one on its own could be explained away as an oversight, a matter of taste, a misunderstanding. But together, they formed a suffocating narrative of his own non-existence. When Amara's cousin got married, the family placed a $5,000 full-page wedding announcement in the society pages of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was a roll call of the King family's prominence. It listed Mr. Harlan and Mrs. Diana King, the bride's uncle and aunt. It listed their children. It mentioned their daughter, Amara King, with no Washington appended, no acknowledgement of the man she had been married to for 3 years. When Cedric saw it, he felt a cold wave of nausea. He had been rendered a footnote in his own wife's life, his name scrubbed from the public record. Amara was livid and wanted to demand a correction, but she was exhausted from caring for a newborn. "Let it go," she'd sighed, defeated. "He wins when we let him upset us." Then came the christening of his godson, the event that produced the very photo Jade now held in her hands. Cedric remembered the weight of the baby in his arms, the scent of lavender oil and church incense. He had stood between Amara and his sister-in-law for the official portrait. He'd bought a $300 engraved silver cup as a gift, which was placed prominently on a table nearby. A week later, his sister-in-law, Chloe, had called, her voice tight with apology. "Cedric, Dad is sending out the photos. You're not in the main one." He didn't have to ask, he knew. When he finally saw it, the cropping was so audacious, it was almost artistic. His navy suit jacket was a dark frame for his wife, his hand a disembodied accessory on her shoulder. The silver cup he had purchased, however, was perfectly in focus. His gift was welcome, but he was not. The true escalation began when Amara got sick. The diagnosis, a rare and aggressive form of cancer, was a brutal blow that shattered their world. Harlan immediately stepped in, wielding his money like a weapon. He insisted on the best doctors, the most expensive treatments. He hired a team of private nurses at a cost of $15,000 a month. On the surface, it was an act of a desperate, loving father. But in practice, it was another tool to marginalize Cedric. Cedric had taken a leave of absence from his job to be Amara's primary caregiver. He learned to manage her medications, to help her bathe, and to sit with her through the long, painful nights. It was grueling, heartbreaking work, but it was an act of love. Harlan saw it as an inconvenience. "Let the professionals handle this, Cedric," he would say, during his brief, sterile visits to their home, his eyes scanning the modest rooms with disdain. "You have your little school to run, don't you? We need you focused on Jade." He made it sound as if Cedric's presence at his dying wife's side was a dereliction of some other, more important duty. During one of Amara's final lucid weeks, the family gathered at the house. Harlan, ever the patriarch, brought up the family trust. "I've made sure all the grandchildren are taken care of," he announced to the room, looking pointedly at his other children. "Educational trusts for all of them, to ensure they have the best start in life." Amara, weak but still sharp, looked at her father. "And Jade's? Is Cedric the trustee?" Harlan waved a dismissive hand. "It's all taken care of, darling. Don't you worry about a thing." After Amara passed, the silence she left behind was filled by Harlan's quiet, relentless campaign. Cedric, drowning in grief and the overwhelming responsibility of being a single father, barely had the energy to fight back. He was invited to holidays, to family dinners at the Buckhead Club where the bill for 6 people could easily top $1,200. He would sit at the vast polished table, a ghost in a $200 blazer, while Harlan held court. The photos were the worst. At Thanksgiving, 5 months after Amara's death, Harlan once again hired a photographer. As the family arranged themselves in the grand foyer, in front of a 20-foot Christmas tree that had been decorated by a professional service for a fee of $4,000. The photographer looked at Cedric through his lens. He then lowered his camera and glanced nervously at Harlan. Harlan gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The photographer cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Mr. Washington? Could I ask you to step out for this one? We're just trying to get a shot of the King family." The room went silent. Every eye was on Cedric. His sister-in-law Chloe looked at the floor, her face flushed with shame. Her husband stared at a point on the far wall. No one said a word. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing the air from his lungs. He was in his deceased wife's family home, being publicly designated as not family. He looked at Jade, who was holding her grandmother's hand. He too young to understand the brutal subtext of the moment. For her sake, he manufactured a smile. "Of course, no problem," he said, his voice sounding distant and strange to his own ears. He stepped away, his heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm, and watched them compose the picture of a family he was no longer a part of. He went and stood by the massive windows overlooking the perfectly manicured lawn, his reflection a faint, solitary figure against the darkening sky. That was the moment he started saving things. He kept the invitation. When Chloe guiltily gave him a copy of the portrait weeks later, he didn't throw it away. He put it in the shoebox, a piece of evidence in a case he didn't yet know he was building. Tuesday, October 24th. The clock on Cedric's computer read 11:02 a.m. He was in his office at Westview Elementary, a small, cluttered space that smelled of old books and brewing coffee. The walls were covered not with expensive art, but with colorful, chaotic drawings from his students. A construction paper sun with googly eyes was taped next to a drawing of a lopsided rainbow. This was his sanctuary, a world away from the cold marble of Harlan's estate. He was hunched over a budget proposal, trying to figure out how to stretch a $5,000 grant to cover a new literacy program for 300 students. It was a puzzle of pennies and good intentions. A small notification popped up on his screen, an email. The sender was j.fitzgerald@harrisonfinch.com. The subject line read R.E., King Family Estate, Document Finalization. He didn't recognize the name or the law firm. He assumed it was sophisticated spam, another attempt to fish for information. But then he saw the list of recipients: Harlan King, Diana King, and inexplicably, Cedric Washington. His curiosity piqued. He clicked it open. The body of the email was brief and chillingly bureaucratic. "Mr. King, per your request, I am attaching the full correspondence history regarding the Cedric exclusion clause for your final review before the documents are formally filed with the probate court. Please confirm all instances of formal omission have been properly documented as per your directives. Best, James Fitzgerald Associate, Harrison and Finch, LLP." Cedric's blood ran cold. The Cedric exclusion clause. It had a name. It was a formal, legal thing. His erasure wasn't just a series of petty social slights. It was a premeditated, documented strategy. His hand trembled as he moved the cursor over the attachment. KFE_correspondence_master.pdf, 112 pages. He clicked. The document opened. It was a scanned compilation of a decade of communication. Emails, internal memos, signed directives, all on the letterhead of Harrison and Finch, a prestigious firm whose partners billed at over $1,000 an hour. It was a meticulous, chronological record of his own deletion. June 2014. Memo from Harlan King to Sterling Harrison. Subject: Holiday Communications. Sterling, please ensure all future holiday cards and announcements feature the family portrait. The approved version is attached. The version with C. Washington is to be deleted from the files. March 2016, email from Harlan King. Regarding the AJC announcement for the wedding, my daughter is to be listed as Amara King, no surname hyphenation. Her spouse is not to be mentioned. September 2017. Directive signed by Harlan King. For the purposes of the King Family Trust, the beneficiary, Jade King, will have her educational fund administered solely by myself. Her temporary guardian, C. Washington, will have no access or signatory authority. Draft the language to ensure this is ironclad. Page after page, the cold, legalistic language piled up. Each sentence a new layer of betrayal. It detailed the instructions for cropping photos, for drafting announcements, for structuring financial instruments to wall him off completely. He saw his own life reflected back at him through the lens of his father-in-law's malice. The family vacations he wasn't invited on, or the charity events where his name was scrubbed from the list of hosts. It was all there, in black and white, time-stamped and initialed. The final pages were the most brutal. They contained drafts of Harlan's will and the legal architecture of the estate. In every clause related to Amara's lineage, he was referred to not by name, but as the widower, or the child's current guardian, a temporary legal status, as if he were a foster parent who could be dismissed at any time. Harlan had spent a fortune, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, all meticulously billed, to build a fortress of paper and ink to keep him out. Cedric leaned back in his worn, 10-year-old office chair, a $200 piece he'd bought from Office Depot. The room felt suddenly small, the air thick and unbreathable. Rain began to streak against the window pane, the gray light matching the sudden void inside him. It wasn't just that Harlan disliked him. It was that he had worked, with methodical, quiet diligence, to erase any formal evidence that Cedric Washington had ever been married to his daughter, that he was the father of his own child. The shoebox in his closet wasn't just a collection of slights. It was the counter-evidence to a decade-long conspiracy. The young, clueless associate at the law firm had made a mistake. He had accidentally copied the subject of the clause onto the email. In his haste to please a powerful client, he had handed the victim the entire case file. The first test came that very evening. At 7:32 p.m., as Cedric was helping Jade with her math homework at their small kitchen table, his phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed, Harlan King. For a second, Cedric's entire body tensed. He wanted to scream, to confront him, to read the cold, damning sentences from the PDF aloud. But a strange, cold calm settled over him instead. He had the truth now, all of it. And the truth was a shield. He let the call go to voicemail and took a deep breath. A minute later, his phone pinged with a voicemail notification. He played it after Jade went to bed, holding the phone to his ear in the darkened living room. Harlan's voice was as smooth and untroubled as ever. Cedric, just calling to check in on my favorite girl. Listen, Diana and I are hosting a small family dinner this weekend, Saturday night at the Buckhead Club. We'd love for you and Jade to be there. Let me know. The casual warmth of it, the pretense of familial affection, was grotesque. The Buckhead Club, with its $200 a plate dinners and strict dress code, was another one of Harlan's stages. Cedric looked at the glow of his laptop screen where the 112-page document was still open. The Cedric exclusion clause. He closed his eyes, the words searing themselves into his mind. Then he picked up his phone and texted back. A wave of nausea rolled through him as he typed the lie. Harlan, thank you. That's very kind. We would be happy to join you. The reply was instantaneous. Wonderful. Playing dumb was the hardest thing he had ever had to do. It was an act of supreme self-control, a performance for an audience, of one who had no idea he was being watched. Every interaction for the next 2 weeks was laden with a sickening, dramatic irony. Cedric knew everything, and Harlan knew nothing of his discovery. The dinner on Saturday was an exercise in surreal tension. Cedric wore his best suit, the same one he'd worn to Amara's funeral. It had cost him $400, a major expense at the time. He sat across from Harlan, who was wearing a new Rolex, likely worth upwards of $30,000, and pontificating about a recent $12 million commercial real estate deal he'd just closed. "You see, Cedric," Harlan said, gesturing with a fork, "the key is to build things that last, a legacy, something tangible that you can pass down. I'm sure you feel that, in your own way, with your school." Cedric met his gaze across the table. He thought of the file on his computer, the tangible legacy of hate Harlan had been building. He managed a small, tight smile. "I do, Harlan. Legacy is very important." His sister-in-law, Chloe, who sat next to him, seemed to sense a shift. She'd always been the most sympathetic of the siblings, though her sympathy never translated into action. She was trapped in her father's financial orbit, her lifestyle dependent on his approval. "Are you okay, Ced?" she whispered while Harlan was distracted by the wine steward. "You seem quiet tonight." "I'm fine, Chloe," he said, his voice even. "Just a long week." He was becoming a very good liar. Each lie felt like swallowing a shard of glass, but he was building a wall of them, brick by painful brick, hiding his strategy behind a facade of normalcy. The following week he ran into Harlan's wife, Diana, at a high-end grocery store in Buckhead. She was inspecting organic avocados, her fingers adorned with rings worth more than Cedric's 2012 Toyota Camry. "Cedric, dear," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Harlan tells me he's updating some of the family estate paperwork. Such a bore, all that legal nonsense, isn't it?" Cedric felt a jolt, but his face remained placid. "It's important to be thorough," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of mild agreement. He was thinking of the phrase tortious interference with inheritance, a term his new lawyer had taught him. He nodded politely and pushed his cart, which contained a $24 rotisserie chicken and a bag of store-brand apples, down the aisle, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was walking through a minefield, and every pleasantry was a potential detonation. The day after the dinner at the Buckhead Club, Cedric made a phone call. He didn't look for a firm in one of the glass towers downtown. He searched for lawyers in Castleberry Hill, a neighborhood known for its art galleries and historic brick buildings. He found Alana James. Her website was simple, professional, and her bio highlighted her work in estate litigation and family law. She was a black woman, a graduate of Spelman and Emory Law, and her photo exuded a no-nonsense intelligence. Her office was on the second floor of a beautifully restored warehouse. Cedric sat in the waiting room for less than a minute before she came out to greet him herself. She was tall and elegant, with her natural hair styled in intricate twists. She led him to a conference room with a large window overlooking the street. Her hourly rate was $450, a significant sum for him, but as he sat down, he knew it would be worth it. He didn't speak much at first. He simply opened his laptop, connected to her Wi-Fi, and emailed her the 112-page PDF. "I think you should read this first," he said. Alana James put on a pair of sleek, black-framed glasses and began to read. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft click of her mouse and the distant city traffic. Cedric watched her face. Her expression, initially neutral, slowly hardened into a look of focused, cold anger. She scrolled back to the beginning, reread a few sections, and then finally looked up at him. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice low and clear, "I have been practicing law for 15 years. I have seen greed, pettiness, and cruelty. But I have never, ever seen a man so meticulously and proudly document his own malice. This is breathtaking." She took off her glasses. "This isn't just a family dispute. Based on this document, your father-in-law has engaged in a decade-long pattern of behavior that could constitute intentional infliction of emotional distress. More importantly, his efforts to write you out of the legal and financial structure of your late wife's legacy, especially concerning your daughter, could be argued as tortious interference with inheritance. He didn't just dislike you, Mr. Washington. He used his wealth and power to try and legally erase you. A weight Cedric hadn't even realized he was carrying began to lift. So, what can I do? What do you want? Alana asked, her gaze direct. We could sue him. A jury would be very sympathetic to you, but a lawsuit would be public, messy, and could take years. It would be hard on your daughter. Cedric shook his head. I don't want his money. I want recognition. I want my daughter's inheritance to be secure, out of his control, and I want him to know that I know. I want him to have to look at me, knowing I have this. He tapped his laptop. Alana nodded slowly, a small, grim smile on her face. I like that. Strategic restraint. We don't file a lawsuit. We use this as leverage to get exactly what you want. We won't threaten him. We will simply inform his legal counsel that we are in possession of this document. The mere existence of this file in our hands makes his entire estate plan vulnerable. His lawyers will understand the liability. They will advise him to settle and to do it quickly and quietly. She continued, but we can make our position even stronger. Do you have any of your own records? That night, Cedric went into the attic of his bungalow. He pulled down a large, gray plastic tote labeled Amara. He opened it. Inside, preserved in the dry, still air, was his counter archive. He pulled out the cropped Christmas card from 10 years ago, the wedding announcement from the newspaper, the christening portrait with his ghost sleeve, the program from a charity gala honoring the King family, his name conspicuously absent from the host committee list, the Thanksgiving photo where he had been asked to step aside. He laid it all out on his dining room table, the one he and Amara had bought for $300 at a consignment shop. Each item was a paper cut to the heart. He worked late into the night, fueled by black coffee and a decade of suppressed indignation. He created a timeline, a dossier. On the left side of each page, he placed a copy of one of Harlan's directives from the PDF. On the right, he placed the corresponding piece of evidence from his shoebox. The email ordering him cropped from the Christmas card was placed next to the card itself. The memo to list Amara by her maiden name was next to the newspaper clipping. It was a perfect, damning diptyque of malice and its effect. He titled the dossier simply, A Decade of Erasure. 2013 to 2023. When he was finished, the sun was rising. He looked at the completed file, a thick, heavy stack of paper. It was the story of his invisibility, and it was about to make him seen. The strike was executed with the quiet precision of a military operation. Friday, November 10th. At 7 a.m., Cedric stood in a nearly empty FedEx Kinko's on Cascade Road. The air smelled of toner and industrial carpet cleaner. On the counter in front of him were two identical, crisp brown packages. Inside each was a pristine, spiral-bound copy of his dossier, A Decade of Erasure, and a flash drive containing the 112-page PDF. One package was addressed to his own attorney, Alana James. The second, larger one, was addressed to Mr. Sterling Harrison, senior partner, Harrison and Finch LLP, at his firm's Buckhead address. He paid the $87.50 for priority overnight shipping with signature confirmation. He did not feel anger or triumph. He felt only a profound, settling calm. He had released the truth into the world. It was no longer his burden to carry alone. By 9:15 a.m., he was back in his own world, the one that mattered. It was Principal's reading hour at Westview Elementary. He sat on a small, child-sized chair in the school library, surrounded by a semicircle of rapt first graders. The book was a simple story about a lost star finding its way back to its constellation. The children's faces, a beautiful spectrum of deep brown, were upturned and open. He read with his full attention, his voice calm and steady. His phone was on silent in his pocket, a million miles away. He was not a widower, not a legal clause, not a cropped photograph. He was Mr. Washington, a man who read stories to children. He was fully present. At 10:30 a.m., the mail carrier delivered the day's post to his bungalow in Westview. It was the usual stack of junk mail, bills, and a circular from the local grocery store. But nestled within it was a single heavy envelope. It was made of a thick, creamy cardstock, and the return address embossed in dark blue ink made the heart stop. The White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. Cedric didn't see it until 11:45 a.m. He had started the habit of coming home for lunch after Amara died, a small way to stay anchored and close to Jade's school. He saw the envelope sitting on the small entryway table and his brow furrowed. He picked it up. It felt important. He slid it open with the simple silver letter opener Amara had given him for his 30th birthday, a $40 gift he cherished. Inside, on stationery bearing the presidential seal, was a formal invitation. The President and the First Lady of the United States request the pleasure of your company at a reception to honor the recipients of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Urban Education Leadership. He scanned the text, his eyes wide. His superintendent had nominated him months ago, a long-shot application he had forgotten about almost immediately. He had been selected, one of 10 school administrators in the entire country. The ceremony was in 3 weeks. The letter stated that as part of the honor, a professional portrait of each recipient would be taken and displayed in the East Wing of the White House for 1 month. His photograph, in the White House. A quiet, incredulous laugh escaped him. For 10 years, another man had worked to erase his image, and on the very day his evidence against that man was delivered, an invitation arrived to have his portrait hung in the most famous house in the country. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic irony. The fallout began the next morning, Saturday. At 10:05 a.m., Sterling Harrison, a man who managed the fortunes of Atlanta's elite from an office that looked down on the entire city, signed for a package at his home. And he opened it. He saw the title page, A Decade of Erasure. He saw his own firm's letterhead on the memos detailing the Cedric exclusion clause. He saw the side-by-side evidence of his client's campaign of malice. His blood likely ran cold. A client documenting his own tortious actions was a lawyer's worst nightmare. It was a multi-million-dollar liability delivered by FedEx. He immediately called Harlan King. At 10:25 a.m., Cedric was in his backyard with Jade, turning the soil for a small vegetable patch. The autumn sun was warm on his deep brown skin. His phone, resting on the patio table, buzzed. The screen lit up with a name he had come to dread, Harlan King. He looked at it, then looked at Jade, who was happily digging in the dirt. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the phone buzzed again, a voicemail notification. He did not listen to it. At 10:45 a.m., the phone rang again. Harlan King. Cedric pressed the silence button on the side of his phone and went back to his gardening. At 11:15 a.m., a text message arrived. It was from Chloe. Dad is going absolutely insane. He's screaming at someone on the phone. What is going on? Call me. He read the message and put the phone back down. At 12:30 p.m., another call. Harlan King, ignored. Later that evening, after Jade was asleep, Cedric finally sat down and listened to the voicemails. They were a perfect, condensed timeline of a powerful man's unraveling. Voicemail 1, 10:26 a.m. Angry, sputtering. Cedric, what is this? What in God's name have you done? My lawyer just called me. You call me. Immediately. Voicemail 2, 10:46 a.m. Shifting to justification. His voice strained. This is a complete and utter misunderstanding of a private family matter. You've taken things out of context. I was always trying to protect Amara's legacy. You have no idea the complexities involved. This is slander. Voicemail 3, 12:31 p.m. The anger replaced by a dawning panic. Cedric, please, just pick up the phone. We can sort this out. Think of Jade. We don't need to involve lawyers. We're family, for God's sake. We can fix this. Voicemail 4, 2:15 p.m. Pleading, his voice cracking. Okay, I understand you're upset. Some things may have been handled poorly. Just tell me what you want. Is it money? Just tell me what you want and we can make this go away. Cedric listened to the last message and felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, not anger. Just a quiet, hollow emptiness. Harlan thought this was a negotiation. He thought he could write a check and erase this, too. He still didn't understand. Cedric didn't want to make it go away. He wanted it to be seen. He deleted the voicemails and went to bed. The consequences cascaded with the swift, brutal efficiency of a corporate collapse. Harlan King, a man accustomed to controlling every variable, found himself in a situation he could not bully, buy, or litigate his way out of. The legal downfall was immediate. Sterling Harrison, whose firm's reputation was now tied to a document detailing profound malpractice, scheduled an emergency meeting. Harrison and Finch charged Harlan a non-negotiable $25,000 crisis management retainer just to begin the cleanup. The advice from his $50 million law firm was blunt and unequivocal. Do not fight this. Settle. The Cedric Exclusion Clause, PDF, was a ticking time bomb. If it ever became public in a lawsuit, the reputational damage to both Harlan and the firm would be catastrophic. He has you dead to rights, Harlan, Harrison reportedly told him. He has your signature on documents that a first-year law student would know are evidence of malicious intent. Alana James, acting on Cedric's behalf, was masterful. She didn't demand a massive payout. She presented a list of non-negotiable terms. The first was the complete and total dissolution of every exclusion clause from all estate documents. Cedric was to be formally and irrevocably recognized as Amara's surviving spouse, with all the rights and recognitions pertaining thereto. Second, with the $1.5 million educational trust for Jade, was to be immediately transferred into a new, separate trust with Cedric as the sole trustee, severing Harlan's control completely. Finally, all of Alana James's legal fees, which amounted to $32,000, were to be paid in full by Harlan. Faced with the alternative of a public lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, Harlan agreed to everything. The settlement was signed within a week. The family fallout was quieter, but just as devastating. Harlan attempted to control the narrative, telling his children that Cedric was extorting the family with baseless accusations, but the story was too specific, the evidence too damning. Chloe, racked with guilt over her years of silent complicity, confronted her father. The carefully constructed facade of the benevolent patriarch crumbled. The weekly family dinners stopped. Holidays became tense, awkward affairs haunted by the ghost of what had been done. The King family, which had looked so perfect in its expensive cropped portraits, was fractured. The final consequence was public, and it came from an unexpected place. 3 weeks later, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a feature story on the local recipients of the presidential awards. There, on page B2, was a large, dignified photograph of Cedric. He was smiling, his deep brown skin luminous, his eyes full of a quiet, confident strength. The caption read, "Westview Elementary Principal Cedric Washington, honored with Presidential Award for Excellence in Urban Education Leadership." The article went on to praise his innovative programs and his dedication to his students. It mentioned his late wife, the beloved attorney Amara King Washington, and his 9-year-old daughter Jade. His name, his wife's full name, his daughter, his profession, his existence. All of it printed in the very same newspaper that had once erased him at Harlan's command. In the clubs and boardrooms of Buckhead, people read the article. They saw the photo. Harlan's friends and colleagues, who had attended the Thanksgivings and seen Cedric asked to step aside, began to ask quiet questions. The man Harlan had tried so hard to make invisible was now, undeniably, seen. 2 years later. It was a bright, cloudless Saturday morning in Atlanta. Cedric stood in the sun-drenched main hall of a renovated warehouse in the West End. The air, which once smelled of machine oil and dust, now smelled of fresh paint, new books, and possibility. Sunlight streamed through massive industrial windows, illuminating the bright, colorful murals painted by students. This was the Amara King Washington Urban Leadership Academy, a tuition-free charter school for middle schoolers from Atlanta's most underserved communities. Cedric had founded it, using a portion of the funds from the estate settlement, combined with his own relentless grant writing and fundraising. He was no longer a principal, he was a founder. He was building a legacy. Jade, now 11 and on the cusp of adolescence, ran up to him, her hair in long, elegant twists with amber beads at the ends that clicked softly. She was holding a piece of drawing paper. "I finished it, Daddy," she said. She handed him the drawing. It was a picture of their family, rendered in the earnest, heartfelt style of a child. On the right was her mother, Amara, with a beautiful smile and shimmering angel wings. In the middle was Jade herself, holding hands with both parents. And on the left was Cedric, drawn tall and proud, a warm smile on his face. She had used a rich, dark brown crayon for their skin, pressing down hard to make the color deep and true. There were no harsh lines, no empty spaces. It was whole. "This is us, Daddy," she said, her voice full of certainty. "All of us. Nobody's missing." Cedric felt a familiar thickness in his throat, but this time it was not from grief or humiliation. It was from a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. He knelt and hugged her tightly. "It's perfect, sweetie. Absolutely perfect." Later that day, he hung the drawing in his new office. On the wall, he placed 2 simple, identical black frames side by side. One held the official 8x10 photograph from the White House. It showed him in a sharp, dark suit, shaking the hand of the President of the United States. His own face, reflected in the photo, was calm and self-possessed. The caption on the brass plate read, "Cedric Washington, Presidential Award for Excellence in Urban Education Leadership." Next to it, in the other frame, he placed Jade's drawing. The leader of the free world and a child's crayon sketch, given equal weight, equal prominence. He stepped back and looked at them. For 10 years, Harlan King had operated under the assumption that presence was something he controlled, something that could be granted or revoked in a photograph, on a guest list, or within a legal document. He believed that if he didn't capture Cedric's image, he could nullify his existence. But Harlan was wrong. Presence isn't given. It's built. It's forged in the quiet, unglamorous moments, the late nights helping with homework, the afternoons spent turning soil in a garden, the patience of reading a story to a child who needs to hear your voice. True worth isn't measured by the price tag on your watch or the square footage of your house. It's measured by the lives you touch and the love you build. Harlan's world was a gallery of expensive, empty frames. Cedric's world was a single, priceless drawing, complete and full of love. He had not been erased. He had been waiting quietly to be seen in the light that truly mattered. Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you should have been seen the most? Let us know your story in the comments below, because every story of finding your own light deserves to be heard. A few months after the academy opened, Cedric received a letter. It was from Harlan. The tone was different. No bluster, no justification. It was the writing of a diminished man. He apologized. He said he was ashamed. He asked if he could visit the school, perhaps make a donation. Cedric read the letter, folded it, and put it in a drawer. He didn't need Harlan's money, and he didn't need his approval. He had already forgiven him, not for Harlan's sake, but for his own. Forgiveness was the final act of taking back his own story. Now he had a school to run, children to inspire, and a legacy of love to build. He was far too present to be bothered by the ghosts of the past.